grief is so interesting because it's so loud. Like, it is so present, and it is just like the noisiest thing that I think anyone would ever experience. Everyone we know will die. That's a promise of being born. And I also feel like it's just like the thing we are least equipped and least prepared for to deal with when that moment actually comes. Our practice is so beautiful in that it really like enables us to find hope where there is absolutely none.
From SGI USA, I'm Cassidy Bradford, and this is Buddhability, the weekly series where I talk with Buddhists from all walks of life about the power we each have to change our lives and the world around us. Hi, Cassidy from Buddhability here. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to subscribe. It'll help the show out, and you'll never miss an episode. If you want more Buddhability content, you can subscribe to our email newsletter in the link below. We put out great content every week. Enjoy the show. Welcome, Oona, to Buddhability. Thank you so much for joining. And I always, every episode, have folks start with an introduction and introduce themselves. So if you can just tell me a little bit about who you are, and then I think maybe for our conversation today, just a little bit about like your life growing up.
Sure. Hey, happy to be here. I'm Oona Friedland. I live outside of Detroit, Michigan, in a little suburb called Berkley. I was born and raised in Michigan, and growing up, I was raised by a single mom who was a lawyer who worked endless hours.
Oh my gosh.
And was super dedicated to her career. She was a lady for the people. A total, like, I always call her like my justice warrior, and she's really kind of like where I got, I would say, like my fighting spirit from. She was constantly just like instilling the values of like equality, justice, like just really always looking out for your community and those around you. And really, I would say like just never having any kind of like judgment in your heart. Those were really like the main messages I was, growing up around. And I also grew up with my older brother, Iggy. So Iggy and I had different dads. My dad was not in my life growing up. And Iggy was 10 years older than me. So growing up, I kind of had like Iggy as my like stand-in father figure, as well as like the cooler older brother who really showed me the ropes of life. And I just adored him. And so it was me, my mom, and Iggy growing up, and we were just such like a tight squad, and that really continued throughout all of my life.
It's interesting. Like, I found that folks that have like tight-knit kind of smaller families and that like immediate family, they're like a unit,
Indestructible.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife, when when she was like making her way into my family, she was just like, wow. I mean, it's hard to find a way in here because, it's just like we've been a crew for like 25 plus years,
Oh,
so yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah. Actually, the same thing with when I met my wife's family. I was like, I can't even like keep up with all of this. Like, you guys are just like having your own thing all the time, and I'm like, hi, I'm here as well.
For sure.
So you mentioned your wife, and I know she is how you got introduced to Buddhism, right?
Yes.
So if you can tell me that story, and how did you end up yourself like, I think I want to do this?
Yeah, so growing up, I was really raised without like religion in our household. It was really like, again, just kind of like instilling those like do good values is kind of like what was like my guiding light and my North Star growing up, of just like really having a firm sense of self and just like a sense of confidence, guided by like, I would say just like always leaning towards altruism, right? And so religion or spirituality was never a big part of my life. It was just something I never really even like thought about much. And so my girlfriend at the time, I haven't said that in forever, but my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, it was, right when we first started dating, she was like, well, I'm going to a Buddhist meeting. And I was like, that's cool. She's like, I want you to come with me. And I was like, great. It's like those early phases of dating when you're just like the yes man. You're like, I'll do anything you want.
Sure, whatever you want. Yep, I'm there.
And So we went to a district meeting, which is essentially, like a local meeting at someone's house. It was super cozy, super inviting. And I remember like walking into the meeting and kind of being thrown off by just how diverse the entire room was, where it was kind of like you walk into a room and you look around and you're like, where would you ever see this group of people together gathering in someone's home except for an SGI meeting? The thing that sticks with me to this day is just how welcoming and kind every single person in that room was. They were all like so thrilled to be, meeting a new person. They had a million questions for me. And I would say at that point in my life, that was like a little over 7 years ago now, I was a completely different person. I would say like I had such like a hard exterior. And I definitely wasn't like the most open and sharing person at the time. And so I just remember kind of being like really thrown off by that and being like, what do they want from me? What are they trying to like suck me into here? I just kind of like took it and ran with it though, because I just sort of noticed like every time I attended a meeting or, got, to dive into the practice a little deeper, it all just sort of made sense. And I would say like I've always been like a pretty rational and logical person and like an overthinker to, some fault. And so I think that like most of my life, I've always tried to use like strategy or just like reason and logic to sort things out. And I would say at that point, I was just like kind of a little bit listless in terms of like, what do I want out of my life? Where am I going? Like I hadn't really like leaned into a career yet. And I was just sort of like out there, but beginning to practice Buddhism and the more consistently I like integrated the practice into my life, I was like, whoa, this is like actually so cool. And I just fell in love with the practice. And it definitely, it took a few months before, like, I think my skepticism and, like, I think just my, like, initial, reservations about it disappeared. But just as time went on, I just really started noticing, like, changes within myself that I was like, wow, I kind of, like, really am excited about, like, the person I'm becoming and the tools I'm learning from my new Buddhist practice.
Wow. I mean, like, it's incredible to ask questions in Buddhism. So I think, like, having that sort of healthy skepticism is great because you really kind of interrogate, like, does this actually make sense? Do I really, like, does it align with my values the way that I want to live my life? So that, you can really interrogate. And when you get to the point that you feel like, oh, yeah, this is actually it, there's this level of like confidence, and we definitely don't believe in like, blind faith, just accepting. Yeah, exactly. So what kind of like early things were you chanting about? And like you notice you like the person that you were becoming. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So it's like kind of funny because when I look back on my life in that time, it's sort of shocking. I feel like just how far I've come. I think just like professionally, personally, with like family dynamics, everything. Like at the time I had moved away from Detroit. I'd been in Michigan my whole life. And I moved away from Detroit to move to Seattle for a job working with, it was kind of like a at-risk youth intervention program. Didn't know a single person. I was miserable. I just quit that job. I moved back to Detroit without a single plan. And I ended up getting a job as like a cashier at like this boutique grocery store that opened up in downtown Detroit. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, this is so crazy. And I was really like laying the foundation for my life. I would say like really rebuilding, because when I had left Detroit initially, I sold my car. I got rid of my apartment. I was like, I'm gone. And this is my new life in Seattle. And then less than a year later, I was back in Michigan. And I was like, damn, why did I do that? And so when I first started practicing, I was really chanting just for like, I really want my life to move forward. And I want to feel empowered, and I want to feel proud of where I'm at in life. And I just had no idea what that looked like. Right. And it was actually through a member in our practice who was like, didn't you say you had some kind of marketing experience? I was like, yeah, totally. I did that for the last 5 years. And he was like, well, that's great. I know an agency that's hiring. I would love to recommend you for this position.
Wow.
And that was like the first thing I remember like really chanting very seriously about. And it was it was so cool because I feel like that's really where my faith first blossomed, where I was just like, I do not feel qualified at all for like a corporate marketing job at a marketing agency. And it was like one of the agencies that was named on Mad Men. And I was like, oh my God, it's like a legacy agency. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
totally.
I remember, I can still picture sitting in front of the Gohanzen, which is the scroll that we chant to. I can still remember like the day that I had the interview, just like chanting with so much determination and really like never having that much belief in myself before. They ended up offering the job to me the same day that I interviewed. And from there, now I've had a few different jobs at a few different agencies. And now I've just had like a career that I really would never like picture having, you know, before I really started practicing, because I think that without, I think just the courage and that determination and the self-belief to put myself out there and to challenge, I just would never have ended up in that position to begin with.
Wow. I think there's something super powerful, like you said, your faith kind of blossoming when you chant and feel like, wow, I didn't know that I could like very sincerely believe in myself, you know, like really have this kind of confidence that like, yeah, I can do this. I do have, you know, power. I feel like that, even today, sometimes I'm chanting and I'm like, wow, how did I forget?
Yeah, for sure.
Why was I like totally doubting myself? Come on now. But I think, yeah, it's like one of the most incredible parts of our practice. And so I know like the kind of bulk of what we're going to talk about today is really like navigating grief. And so to kind of dig into that, I know within maybe like a year of your practice, you had like a huge kind of family health challenge. So if you're ready, we can kind of, start with that.
Great. So my brother Iggy, this was in like 2019. So it was a little more than a year after I had, you know, started practicing and really participating in the SGI seriously. He started experiencing just some like random like illnesses. I would say like he would have this like weird face pain or these headaches that wouldn't go away or jaw aches. And he really struggled to kind of like figure out what was going on with that. But, you know, he was really bringing it up quite a bit and expressing great discomfort. And so that was kind of like always present. And then it was about like a year later. I remember it was truly, I think like within the first month of the lockdown from COVID, I just got a phone call from my mom one day. And she was like, so Iggy just got taken to the hospital. He needs a whole host of tests and all these things. And I was really thrown off because I was like, wait, I thought it was just like, you know, my brother and I at that point, we spoke every day. My mom and I spoke every day. We saw each other quite often. And so I was really caught off guard by like, okay, now he's in the hospital and needs a spinal tap. Like, what's going on with that? It was still very early in COVID. It was very hard to be like, is it safe to come see you? What are we doing? And I remember like the first time I went to my mom's house because my brother and mom lived together. Went to my mom's house after he had gotten home from the hospital. And I remember being like so impacted by the version of him that I saw that day, because it was almost as if I would like overnight, so much had changed. And come to find out, you know, after I think what was like a year of struggling to find a diagnosis, he had a degenerative autoimmune disorder. It's called paraneoplastic neuropathy. And basically the longer that it took to find a diagnosis and to like find out what was actually going on with him, the more severely his abilities declined. And so, you know, what started out as just these like headaches eventually turned into something much greater. I just remember like keeping up with every doctor's appointment, keeping up with every specialist, checking in every day, like what's going on now, and just having so much anxiety and just like so much confusion and sadness, because with this disease, it's actually like one of the rarest diseases you can get. And it's also like one of the most understudied diseases. So like finding out like a very clear path to like, okay, well, if you just take this medicine and go to these treatments, then maybe we'll see like things can get better. But unfortunately we learned that there was really no like remission from this disease. It was kind of like, because it was neurological, everything that had been lost up to that point was really kind of like gone for good. But something that I think is so important to share is just like throughout that time, like fighting to find a diagnosis, trying to find specialists. And, my mom and my brother's dad and Iggy traveled to the Mayo Clinic, and, they were just so determined. And Iggy just had like the most unbelievable fighting spirit, I think, that like I have ever seen in life to this day. Like, I think just his determination to truly not be defeated and really live with like that never give up spirit was what kept us all going throughout this time, even when it was just so scary and, just facing so many unknowns and question marks day to day. It was just so remarkable how both of, my mom and his dad rallied around him with, utmost support, and how Iggy was just like, never really let us see him sweat, even though all of us were just, scared to death of like what the future held for him.
Wow. For anybody that's had any moment like that, where it's like you get news by call that just like, changes your life, in like that one moment. How did you handle both like your own personal experience of like anxiety and fear, and also like navigating supporting your family? That's like, anybody that's had, family members that are ill or have like chronic diseases, it's a lot. It's a lot to be like in a caregiving kind of role. So I'm just curious like what your experience was like.
Yeah, it's, it's kind of funny because looking back on that time, I feel like, my wife and I frequently talk about, I feel like when we were in it, it was all consuming in a way where like, it was so hard to zoom out and be like, today I'm so panicked and I'm so worried and I'm so scared and I'm like, what am I going to do? It was really just like a day-to-day battle. You know what I mean? Where it was kind of just like, okay, today we're going to get up, we're going to chant, we're going to, just like do everything we can to support this mission, to support my family, support our family. I think what made that time a lot easier to, I think, get through was just like how much protection like really revealed itself throughout all of these situations. Like, for example, the fact that like my mom and brother lived together during this time. Iggy had recently moved back from a long time living out in Omaha, and he was, moved in with my mom temporarily, and he was able to, convert her garage into his ceramic studio. He was an artist. He actually made these pieces behind me. He made these for my wife and I when we moved into our house. So there was just so much like protection kind of in this situation where it was like, wow, okay, he's living with my mom, who is more than equipped to be a caregiver. And mystically enough, she had just retired from her career as a lawyer, literally like a month before the lockdown happened. So it was like, if she, would still have been working, dedicating her time to navigating insurance and doctors and medical portals and everything, it wouldn't have happened. And throughout his illness, he was still able to get up and go to the garage outside and work in his studio and fire up the kiln and work with clay. And so I think just like through all of that, like, even though it was just so difficult, what was so amazing about our practice was that it really allowed us not just to look at like I think just like the hard things, but it really allowed us to look and be like, wow, there is so much fortune here that like, I think without, the encouragement of our fellow members or, when we study like Buddhist material, it really forces us to shift our perspective into like looking at the other side and being like, but what is the good here? When I look back, I feel like it's protection that I started practicing when I did, because truly, I don't know how I would have, faced this like life and death battle without a practice like this.
Yeah, you're so right. The ability to be able to shift your perspective like really changes the way you're experiencing everything day to day, and also when you look back on it, like it can change the meaning. Because I even think about like the most painful experiences in my life, while they were like horrible in many ways, I also can see how like I created value from those things, or how it was a thing that actually needed to happen so that I could, you know, transform something. I feel like that is like so, yeah, it's just so crucial. It changes like our quality of life. Totally. Because you know, in Buddhism, there are 4 sufferings that we can't run away from, and one is illness. You know, that just, we're people, we're going to get sick. We get born, we age, and get born. We are born.
Get born, yep.
We get born. We're born, we get sick, we age, and we die. Those are, you know, inevitable parts of life. But, you know, we don't have to only suffer. But I think something I'm like curious about, and I think maybe we'll talk about more, is being able to see the protection, like you mentioned, and also recognize that doesn't just totally erase the fact that, you know, like has this illness, right? And that's the reality, and being able to like kind of hold space for both of those things to be true rather than just one or the other. So, I mean, maybe with that we can kind of lead in more to then like what happened after that.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and it's important to say that like while I'm painting it as like, yay, there was so much protection here in the situation, it was devastating, right? I mean, you know, my big brother Iggy was just like everything to me. And I think that, you know, anyone who has watched a loved one get sick and see like physical changes appear, you know, new limitations crop up, conversations change, you know, what you can do as a family changes. And, you know, like there was a while there where for about 3 years, Iggy was unable to eat, and he had to, you know, eat through a feeding tube. And so as a family, we couldn't sit around for a meal together, you know, and that's just like so integral to the family experiences, sharing a meal and connecting over a dinner table. And so like even just something as small as that we often take for granted, it was really like forcing us to kind of be like, but what can we do here? Like, what can we do here to still like make meaning and like, you know, not just concede to defeat of like, okay, well then we'll just never gather again. You know what I mean? And so I think inside of that, there was just like a lot of grief that I think was delayed. You know, at the time when you're in something like that, you really can't let yourself start thinking about like everything that you've lost or everything the person who is sick has lost or is losing, because that just like takes you down so quickly. And so I think what was so amazing about like our family's effort and like our family's unity throughout this time is that we just like really never stopped fighting for joy. We never stopped fighting to make new memories. You know, like we were so determined to say like, no, this isn't how the story's going to end. Like, absolutely not. Like, we are not just going to like sit around in sadness. And like, we took like 2 very special trips with my wife, Iggy, and my mom. And we just were able to like really still fight for our happiness. And you know, it was hard. It was like hard to like pack everything up, get all the medications together, you know, being mindful of like, how far can we travel? You know, what's feasible, but just still that like fighting spirit that we all like stoked within us was just so amazing, you know? And I think that like, so I guess I can segue into the fact that Iggy did pass away. He died, in August 2 years ago. And, I always have to catch myself when I say like it was very unexpected, because it makes it sound like it was like a sudden death or something, which, you know, to me it very much was, because I think anyone who has been in a situation where like illness is and an unknown thing is present, I think that for me, the last thing on my mind was like death is a possibility. It's just not, and it wasn't going to be. And I think, you know, what's interesting is when I can look back at that time clearly, I can see like, okay, that was a significant change that probably at the time I was ignoring. You know what I mean? Like I didn't want to see it. I didn't let myself see it, but signs were there. And, you know, I woke up one morning to a bunch of missed phone calls from my mom, which is never good, right? And Iggy passed away at home, in his bed with his dog by his side, which, you know, was in a way very special that he was able to go in an environment where he was, you know, surrounded by love and comfort and just peace. It was peaceful, you know. But, you know, those are, of course, my reflections 2 years out. At the time, it was just like the most tragic, awful, horrific thing I'd ever experienced is, you know, arriving to my mom and brother's home, you know, the morning that my brother died and waiting, you know, for people to come take him out. Right. And I think that really started it opened the floodgates of everything that I had not been able to let myself feel like those 3 or 4 years when he was sick.
Yeah. I think like because we don't talk about death that often in culture, like, or in the US at least, like nobody thinks about like the actual, I shouldn't say nobody, but like I don't think about the actual moment of somebody passing and then the moments after that you're like reeling, and then also like, okay, I have to like plan a funeral and I have to like get back to work in a week and I have to like the noise that I imagine like is, I mean, I can't even imagine it, honestly. So when the floodgates open, so to speak, like how did you move through the world? could you move through the world?
Not really.
You just
No. Yeah, it was awful, just to like speak very candidly. And I think that is like, I think that how you mentioned, like, we just don't talk about death, right? Yeah. I think that just really adds to, I think, just like the shock of grief, because I think it's so weird how you mentioned like the 4 sufferings, like we all will die. Everyone we know will die. That's a promise of being born, right? And I also feel like it's just like the thing we are least equipped and least prepared for to deal with when that moment actually comes, right? And I just remember that morning so clearly, like just falling to my knees and in my head thinking like, I just don't want to be the person with like a dead brother. Like, is this really happening to me? Like, this is my story now, you know, because it's sort of like, you sort of like hear stories and like you see datelines and you're like, wow, that really sucks for that family. But then like when it happens to you, you're like, oh my God, like it's me. Like this is the story I'm really living right now. And there's just like no way to change that, right? Yeah. And it's just so interesting because it's like when Iggy was sick, of course that was so top of mind. And like it was energizing in a way because it felt like there was always something to fight for. It felt like there was always something to run towards. It felt like there was always an opportunity to make a cause. And when we say like make a cause in our Buddhist practice, it really means like, what can we do? Like what kind of action can we take on behalf of ourselves, on our loved ones, on our community to really, you know, put forth our faith and say like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to dedicate it to like the well-being and the health and the safety of my brother and my family. And you know what I mean? And I think that when Iggy died, I had this moment of feeling like, wow, like, did I do something wrong? You know, because it's sort of like our practice is so beautiful in that it really like enables us to find hope where there is absolutely none, right? Like, I'm sure that many practitioners can tell many stories about that moment, you know, chanting or having like that breakthrough of just being like, I thought I was stuck and then I wasn't. And I would say that like when my brother died, it felt like, whoa, like what happened? Like this was not supposed to happen. And I couldn't accept that like this was how the story was going to end. Right. And I think it's just like grief is so interesting because it's so loud, like what you're saying, like it is so present and it is just like the noisiest thing that I think anyone would ever experience. And I think what's so hard about it is there's really not many places you can go with it, right? I would notice how many times people who would ask me like, how's your mom doing after my brother died? But no one was really able to ask me, like, how are you doing? Right? Because I think it was like, it's hard. It's uncomfortable. It's like we always want to find a way to kind of like other the situation to like make it just a little more removed. So like asking about your mom might feel a little safer than you, right? I just felt like I just have nowhere to go with just how painful this is. And I just don't think that anyone is like really able to understand like the depths of my suffering right now, you know?
Yeah, I imagine it has to be like incredibly lonely.
Mm-hmm.
Like, did you, like, were you able to relate to any like family or friends, or did you feel like even that is like not gonna be the same as this unique grief that I have?
I mean, like, I would say that, you know, the support system that I had in place, like, you know, my wife, my mom, my sister-in-law, so many like dear friends who had been by our side since all of it, you know, started, really, they were incredible. And it was like, really, without them, I do not know what I would have done. My family was very private. Iggy was a very private person. He was a very prideful person. And so it was hard for him to really like share with his friends and his family really what was going on with him, you know, health-wise. And so there was a select handful of people that were really in the know. And then for everyone else, I think it was just equally as shocking to learn like, oh, your brother died? Like, why did that happen? You know? And so there was also this aspect of like illness. And I think like that, it just has a way of becoming sort of insular, because there's this like, I think, instinct in a way to protect people from, I think, like the reality and just how harsh reality can be. And so I think that now I've had a lot of time to like chant about it and reflect on like sort of like the anger I felt, you know, initially when Iggy died. I think I had a lot of anger in my heart for people who weren't able to be there and weren't able to show up. But I think that like I have to remind myself, and I'm constantly reminding myself, that like we don't know what other people have going on, and other people don't know what we have going on. And really, they're very lucky to not know how, you know, awful it is to be someone who's in active mourning or grieving, right? And so I think there's a certain like level of understanding that I had to do as well that took a really long time to do. I think to get to a place where I could let go of just like that anger or that resentment that was really kind of keeping me stuck in just like that's not really the real issue here. I'm so angry that my brother died. I'm like pissed off that like that this happened, and it's no one's fault. It's no one else's fault. It's just the reality of the situation, right?
Yeah. One thing I'm really curious about is like, we kind of talked about this, you know, earlier, but like Buddhism has many like really incredible perspectives and ways to understand the workings of the universe. And sometimes that's not always how we actually feel about reality, right? Like, okay, yeah, this is the Buddhist view of life and death, but like, that doesn't make me actually feel any better.
Yeah.
So, I'm curious, like, what did your practice look like, you know, in the months after he passed? And like, how did you grapple with like really trying to understand what happened and like, Yeah,
that's a great question. I think that like, what's so wonderful about our practice is that like every member, every leader, everyone you encounter inside of our organization, even if they've never like really been through what you've been through, they'll find a way to relate, because we just have like so much empathy as practitioners. We have so much care for those around us, right? And so even if other members or practitioners, you know, they didn't know what I was really going through. And I think like looking back now and like saying that, it doesn't feel right, because I think like I have like really transformed, I would say like my view and my feelings on, you know, all of that.
Yeah.
But I think at the time I was just like so desperate for my practice to like give me an answer, right? I felt like I had chanted so many hours. I had made so many causes. I had done every single thing I thought I was supposed to do, and it still didn't save my brother's life, right? And so while there was never a day, since I started practicing that I've stopped practicing, there was definitely a good like year and a half there where I was really on autopilot. Like I'd be chanting for nothing. I'd be, at the center feeling nothing. Right. And, I think that's like, that carried through every other, I would say like avenue of my life. It was just this sort of like nothingness, just this blank feeling, because I think I was so desperate for someone to give me an answer that would make sense to me. And I feel like there was a part of me that sort of just like went away the day that Iggy died. And I think that for so much of like the freshness right after he died, I kept feeling just this like urgency to like get back to who I was, to get back to normal, to get back to being okay, to get back to not being angry and not being depressed and not crying 24/7 and not feeling like I want to go to that party or see that friend or do anything. It was just such a lonely experience because, of course my wife was also in deep grief over losing her brother-in-law too. And, grief has a way of, I think, really just making you feel crazy in a way, right? Where I would even start telling myself that like my wife just is wanting me to like feel better and do better and like get off the couch and stop crying. When in reality, no one was saying that. She wasn't saying that. I mean, it's very understandable. I lost like my best friend and like my closest family member. You know what I mean? Like, of course I'm going to be devastated by that. Yeah. But I think that like the battle for me was really coming to a place of understanding that like there was no like return. There was no looking back. There was no going back to like some version of myself, before Iggy died. Because, even when Iggy got sick, it was just like, there was a part of, I think, myself that just did not allow me to like look back on like all the 30 years of life I had lived up to that point, because it was just too painful to have to figure out how to take the reality of having my brother kind of become, someone who was just a completely different person who was changed by his illness versus the person I spent, 25, 26 years growing up with. And we have to kind of sever that, right? When someone gets sick and we're in that situation where it just becomes too painful to recall, like, remember when we took that awesome trip, we did that awesome thing together. And so you become kind of used to just like having these parts, I would say, like silenced of yourself. And then when Iggy died, I felt like the only thing I had to reference was the last 3 or 4 years that he was sick, because for so long I had to just deny that there was a reality before that. And so I think with that came like, wait, then who am I now? Who am I now as someone who has lost someone to an illness, who is like also like newly married and like has a whole life in front of her, who thought like her brother would be by her side for and now is not, right? Like you spend 30 years preparing for one thing to be true, and then in an instant it's completely gone. And so I think what was like a really profound shift for me was probably, and it took a very long time, probably like a year and a half after Iggy's passing, for me to be like, wait, there's just like actually nowhere to return to. And like, it's actually up to me to just like forge a new path. No one's going to give that to me. No one is going to have the words that are going to take away all my pain. No one is going to have the perfect explanation of why people die and why some people recover from an illness that they said would kill them. Right. It's just like, there's no way you can really explain that. And I really had to like really chant to understand that, like, no, I have to kind of get to know myself all over again as a new person with a new identity, right?
Was there like one moment that was like aha, or did it feel like a gradual over the course of maybe a couple months or even, year and a half?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was weird because after Iggy died, it felt like I knew like 10 other people in my very close social circle who passed away, like my friends' parents, like, very dear family friends. And it felt like death was this thing that was just like right here all the time, 24/7. Right.
Oh my gosh.
And I think that like, when I spoke about grief being something that is just like very isolating and alienating and just makes you feel a little bit nutty sometimes, I was like really pushing up against the fact that like we just don't talk about it. And I noticed like, you know, after I lost someone, I started like thinking about all the people I knew up to that point who had also lost someone. And I noticed like they don't really share about their family member that passed. They don't share about that parent. They don't share about that sibling so often. And I felt so called to keep Iggy's memory alive. I just felt called to post a photo of him on Instagram and be like, miss going, you know, doing this with him. This was such a fun night. We went out. Oh my God, it was crazy. And I just like, I never stopped sharing him. I never stopped saying his name. And with that, like all those other people I mentioned who had also experienced loss very close, you know, to when Iggy died, I noticed like how many people would start kind of like reaching out to me and being like, is this normal to feel this way after my dad died? Or like, what did you do with the flowers from the funeral home? You know, like, did you press them? Did you save them? Can I just throw them out? Is that okay? And it just became like so apparent that like every other person, I mean, every other person who experiences this is equally as lost. And I think that like the more vocal that I was about just how painful it was, I felt like in a way it just made it so much easier for others to like see that and kind of humanize it. And when they would experience a loss, like I just noticed how many people would reach out to me and kind of look to me to be like, what do I do? What am I supposed to feel? Is this okay? And through that, I think that really woke me up to be like, it's not just you, Oona. You're not the only one that's ever going to experience, you know, a loss that really like takes the wind out of your sails and makes you question every single thing you thought your whole life, right? And I think that like that's what's so beautiful about our Buddhist practice is, and you know, that's why we practice inside of a community, is because we're just not alone, period. At the end of the day, full stop, we are never alone. We're never stuck. We're never deadlocked. There's always someone out there who wants to hear our victories, who wants to hear our struggles. And I think that like I really turned so inward, you know, in my time of just like depression and sadness and everything, that I forgot that. I let myself forget that. I let myself forget that people just wanted to be there. People cared, but I just like wasn't really able to see that at the time. And I think that, you know, that's pretty common. I mean, everyone who's experienced like sadness or like whose tendency it is to self-isolate or like go inward when we experience something hard, I mean, it's like, duh, of course people just like want to see you succeed. But I think that when you're so in it, it's so easy to remember, like, or it's so easy to forget. It's so easy to forget, like, people care. You know what I mean?
I'm somebody that definitely, like, self-isolates, and I've really had to, like, make it, like, a skill that I build to tell people, like, oh, I'm, like, really struggling right now. So much so that, like, you know, another person in our Buddhist community, like, I was just telling her, when I'm like really experiencing a lot of anxiety, I start to kind of like isolate. I'm not as responsive. Sometimes I don't realize that it's happening. And that was like 6 or 7 months ago. And a couple of weeks ago, she sent me a voice note out of the blue, and she was like, hey, how you doing? Haven't heard from you in a while. Noticed you're not being that responsive. Just want to check in on you. And I was like, yeah, I'm doing fine. And then a day or two later, I was like, oh, actually, I'm not doing fine. Like, wow, okay. But to like have people in our lives that can, to your point, are always there, like recognizing and trying to support us, even if we can't always see that that's what's happening. And I think, honestly, even if we can't see that that's happening and it maybe doesn't have an impact on the surface right away, I think it still touches our lives, right? Like, so all of those folks reaching out, like, even when you couldn't quite see it, it still is like really shifting something, you know, opening your heart. You mentioned too, like, different people reaching out to you and like, yeah, asking questions. I'm wondering, like, what have those conversations looked like? And I'm asking for like somebody who's listening right now that maybe is in the throes of grief, like what kind of things do you end up usually talking about?
I think that like the biggest theme I've noticed is, I think, just like the confusion, right? Like it's so confusing. And I mean, like, again, not to sound like a broken record, but like death is everywhere around us. Death is just such a guarantee. And then every single time someone dies, it's like, why did that happen? Well, like, what happened there, right?
Yeah.
And I think that the biggest thing I've noticed is like people, when they reach out, and when I reach out about my own grief and people want to share about their grief, like they just want their loved one to feel like they matter. They don't want their loved one's death to be in vain. They want to still say their name. They want to still share stories. They want to say like, oh my God, my mom would have loved this. Or like, oh my God, my brother, he loved riding his bike. Like, I thought about him today. Or like, you know what I mean? What's so weird is like when someone dies, there's sort of this spectrum, right? Of like, we're never going to talk about them again because it's like awkward or painful, or what are we going to say? And I think that we do that to ourselves in a way, right? Because I think like as someone who's gone through this, we really I have a tendency to kind of like, when it all first happened, really like center other people's, feelings or what I assumed their feelings might be. Like, I don't want to make them uncomfortable by talking about my dead brother, right? But as I just stopped like thinking that way, I just realized like, oh my God, people are always so happy when I share stories about him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like when people reach out to me, or like I see people post photos, or I'm like, oh my God, I love that I learned that about your family member. I love that I learned that about your friend. That is so cool. I'm going to remember that. Like, I'm going to chant for them. Thank you so much for letting me know about that. Right. And I think that is to me what makes it all worth it, is just like, even in death, we still can honor people's lives. We still can honor who they were, who they would have been. Like, even, my wife and my mom and I went on this like very campy Detroit River Princess boat ride this weekend. And we had such a blast on the dance floor. And, after the boat ride, we were like, oh my God, Iggy would have been tearing it up. He would have had too much to drink. You know what I mean? Like,
totally.
And so I think it is just so important that people know that it's like, it's okay. In fact, like it should be celebrated that you want to still talk about them,
Wow. Yeah. It's so interesting, right? That like, something that can carry so much like heaviness and pain can also like still, like, somebody's memory can still bring this like intense kind of joy and also appreciation. Like, wow, like I can't believe that I had this person in my life to be able to have like treasure so deeply. I always feel like, oh, I don't want to, make somebody remember something painful. I don't want to, I want to be mindful, but this sort of like social pressure, right, that I think you've been touching upon.
Yeah. And I think that it's also, I think, something that has been so surprising for me. Like in our practice, we talk a lot about kind of like these, like being in rhythm with the universe, right? Like when we chant to the Gohanzen, like what we're doing is we're really getting our life in rhythm with the universe, right?
Yeah.
If that's a simple explanation.
Yes.
And I think what's been so surprising has been just like all of these very like mystic things that have happened in the wake of Iggy's death. Like, I think number one, all of the connections that I've been able to make with so many of Iggy's friends, his former, like artist colleagues, his peers, his mentors, all of these people, they really like want somewhere to go to talk about Iggy. And like so often I'll get like a random story like from someone on Facebook Messenger who like, I remember my brother talking about this guy, and they'll just like want to share a memory, right? Or like just literally 2 weeks ago, one of his friends from high school messaged me saying like, hey, I bought a piece of art from Iggy years and years ago, and I really think you should have it, and I want to send it to you. And it's just things like that where it's just like, wow, the thoughtfulness of people. And like, I just have to share this because it is like one of those things in our Buddhist practice that like when things like this happen, we're like, oh my God, how could that happen? But so my mom and Iggy's dad have just been like such fervent supporters of Iggy's art through his entire life. Like my brother never had a real job. He was an artist. He was a self-made, successful ceramicist, multiple solo gallery shows, like a thriving ceramic practice, everything. And, after he died, they have still been out there like getting, galleries to show his work. They had a solo exhibition for him. It was like his first posthumous retrospective. And it's just amazing how they have like really, stayed committed to keeping Iggy's art and work alive. But so my mom was going to get these prints made of, some drawings that Iggy had done at a print shop. And the girl working at the print shop was like, did Iggy Sumnick do these photos? She was like, yeah, like that's my son. And he passed away. Like, do you know him? She was like, oh my God, like I taught with Iggy when we were like working teachers in like this after school program. And I actually have these beautiful film portraits I took of him that I would love to give you. And it was just like one of those things where I think like when someone dies, one of the most for me, one of the most painful things is just feeling like there's nothing new. Nothing new is going to happen. Every memory that you've had, every belonging that person has had, like there becomes a scarcity, right? And for this girl to, recognize Iggy's work and then to say to my mom, I have these portraits of him that no one had ever seen. And then for us to have these new photos of him and just have another snapshot of him in life, like things like that are just so encouraging and really just show like in our Buddhist practice, like we just say like the oneness of life and death, they're so intertwined. And it's just so amazing how even with someone's death, there is still so much there to discover because it's just like we can choose to believe whatever we want. And I'm really seeing that like when I just believe that there is so much left to discover, it shows itself, right?
Wow. I mean, I feel like this is such a, reflection of your life. And I'm sure, of course, everyone in your environment as well, but like so much comes down to our own like life state, right? Like everything reflects us. And you sharing that although it took a while, like you were able to really start to see like, okay, who am I from this point forward? And then, with that, like being able to see like almost like who is Iggy from this point forward as well, right? Like,
yeah, for sure.
Life doesn't just stop in that moment, It's like, this is so incredible. I feel I've done, a couple of interviews with folks that have lost family members and friends, and every single time I always feel like I've kind of met their family member through them, like, oh wow, it sounds like they were so incredible. I feel like I'm getting to know them, and I definitely am feeling that way about Iggy, like in the way that you speak about him. He feels very like his presence is very alive. So I'm wondering like, where you're at now, this kind of shifting perspective and awareness that like, okay, it doesn't, things continue on, there are new things to like be discovered. With that kind of new sense of who you are, what like dreams and ambitions do you have for your life? And it doesn't have to be anything big, but just now being able to have a new thing that you're working toward in your life. Like, I'm just curious what that is looking like right now.
Yeah, it's been like, honestly, it's been a lot of trial and error, right? I think that like in our practice, there's a saying where it's like the heaviest door to open is the door to your own life. And it's so true. And like, for example, this was in June. I completed a half Ironman. So it was like a 1.2 mile swim, a 56 mile bike ride, and a 13.1 mile run. And I had spent like 6 months training for that. And I was like, this is who I am. I'm a warrior. Like, I'm a fighter. Like, watch me train and do this and cross that finish line. And like, I'm going to show everyone I'm not just depressed, right? Yeah. But then when I crossed the finish line, I was like, oh my God, I'm still depressed. Like, what? And so it was very humbling, because I think that I think what's so amazing about life in general, but especially our practice, is that it's just like, okay, like one step is just that. It's one step. It's one step toward a goal. It's one step toward the next thing. And so it's like, doing the Ironman, that wasn't going to be my end all be all. I just had to do it to understand that. And I think that that was sort of, I would say, like a rock bottom for me, which was actually such a benefit, because from that, it was like the last thing I think I needed to shed to be like, it's not going to come from any external accomplishment. It's not going to come from anyone else. And so, you know, since then, I felt like the day after my Ironman, every single thing since June 8th has shifted in my life in such a profound way, and not without, you know, immense pain and so many tears and so many just like endless why, still seeking, right? But I think really what changed was just like, I just somehow in front of the Gohanzen, I just like really renewed my vow. And when we say that, it's sort of just like this remembering of like this deep reverence we have to have for our own life. And I think that, you know, I talked a little about it, but like when someone dies, it kind of becomes this thing of like, people always want to like offer platitudes of like, well, they're with you in your heart. And then it creates this thing in your head where I'm like, well, he was a really cool person and he was like larger than life. And like, I'm a little tired. I'm a little depressed. Like, I you know what I mean? But I think that like my prayer this past summer was really just like, I sincerely want to be happy no matter what that looks like. Like, even on the day where I am like the saddest I've ever been, I want to remember that happiness is within reach for me. It is within reach. And it took a really long time until I really felt like that was true. You know, it's like in our practice, sometimes we say like, even if you don't believe it, just chant like you believe it. And, you know, I would say like this summer, I was like really sadder than I'd probably ever been, apart from, you know, right when Iggy died. And I think it was because I wasn't letting myself remember that I can be happy. And so I just chanted daily to be like, no, Oona, like you have really no option but to be happy, because like, come on, like seriously, come on. And it took like some tough love from like myself and those around me and other practitioners to be like, we're not telling you that you have so much to give and so much like fight in you because we don't think you're, you know, not fighting or like you're a loser, which is so easy to believe. But it's like, no, everyone here genuinely wants you to be happy because you deserve to be. And so I feel like I stopped just placing that emphasis on like being okay and being fine and just being like, it's a daily battle. That's why it's a daily practice. That's why we have to stay in touch with our community and our Buddhist friends and people in our life who care about us and check on us, because it's that serious. It's a daily thing to remember our worth, to remember that even inside of like the most tragic events that people can experience, like there is still hope there. There is still happiness to be found, and it's possible, right?